In the spring of 2024, a documentary researcher was combing through boxes at an estate sale in Salem, Massachusetts. The Victorian house had belonged to the Hartwell family for over a century, and their descendants were finally clearing out generations of accumulated possessions. The researcher, who specialized in uncovering forgotten American stories, had learned to recognize historical treasures hidden among everyday items. That Tuesday morning, she discovered what appeared to be an unremarkable family photograph, tucked between old recipe books. The sepia-toned image showed 5 people arranged in the formal style typical of 1910. A stern patriarch in a dark wool suit, 3 children of varying ages dressed in their Sunday best, and a mother seated prominently in the center. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual about the Whitmore family portrait. The father stood with the rigid posture expected of men in that era, one hand resting protectively on his wife's shoulder. The children, 2 boys and a girl, displayed the solemn expressions that long exposure times demanded. Even their clothing reflected the modest prosperity of Boston's growing middle class during the industrial boom. But as the researcher examined the photograph more closely under natural light, she noticed something that made her breath catch. While every other family member stared directly into the camera lens with the stoic composure of the period, the mother's eyes were fixed on something else entirely. Her gaze was directed toward the left side of the frame, intense and urgent, as if she were trying to communicate something beyond the photographer's lens. The woman's hands, the researcher observed, gripped the wooden arms of her chair with visible tension. Her knuckles appeared almost white against the dark fabric of her dress. This was not the relaxed pose of a contented mother, but something far more complex. The photograph's back bore only a faded inscription in careful script. The Whitmore family, Boston, Massachusetts, September 1910. Back in her research office, the documentary investigator spread the Whitmore family photograph across her desk under a high-powered magnifying lamp. The image quality was remarkably clear for a photograph from 1910, suggesting it had been taken by a professional studio rather than an amateur with a box camera. This detail would prove significant in the days to come. She began her investigation with the Boston City Archives, searching through records from the early 1900s. The name Whitmore appeared in various documents, property deeds, business licenses, school enrollment records, but tracking down this specific family proved surprisingly challenging. Most middle-class families from that era left substantial paper trails, yet the Whitmores seem to have mysteriously vanished from official records after September 1910. The breakthrough came when she contacted Dr. Harold Brennan, a historian at Harvard University who had spent decades studying Boston's immigrant communities during the industrial period. "The Whitmores," Dr. Brennan said, his voice carrying immediate recognition over the phone. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in years. They lived in the South End, near what is now the medical district." Dr. Brennan explained that the Whitmore family had been among the more prosperous residents of their neighborhood. Robert Whitmore owned a small textile importing business that supplied fabrics to Boston's growing garment industry. His wife, Eleanor, was known in their community as an educated woman who taught piano lessons to supplement the family income. Their 3 children, Thomas, aged 14, Mary, aged 10, and little Samuel, just 4 years old, were regular attendees at the local Methodist church. But here's what's interesting, Dr. Brennan continued. The family disappeared quite suddenly in the fall of 1910. The business was sold, the house was abandoned, and no one in the neighborhood ever heard from them again. This revelation sent chills down the researcher's spine. The photograph was dated September 1910, possibly one of the last images ever taken of the family before their mysterious disappearance. Armed with the address that Dr. Brennan had provided, the researcher traveled to Boston's South End to examine the neighborhood where the Whitmores had lived. The area had changed dramatically over the past century, with many of the original Victorian row houses demolished to make way for modern medical facilities. However, a few of the old buildings remained, their brick facades bearing witness to the community that once thrived there. She knocked on doors of the remaining historic houses, hoping to find longtime residents or families who might have inherited stories about the mysterious Whitmore disappearance. At the 4th house, an elderly woman named Mrs. Dorothy Patterson answered the door. At 87 years old, Mrs. Patterson was the daughter of immigrants who had lived in the neighborhood during the early 1900s. "My grandmother used to tell stories about that family," Mrs. Patterson said, inviting the researcher inside for tea. "The Whitmores lived just 3 houses down from where we are now. My grandmother always said there was something strange about how they left. One day they were there, the next day the house was empty." Mrs. Patterson led the researcher to an old wooden chest in her living room, filled with photographs and documents her family had preserved for over a century. Among the items was a newspaper clipping from the Boston Herald, dated October 15th, 1910. The headline read, "Local business owner closes shop suddenly, family whereabouts unknown." The brief article explained that Robert Whitmore had sold his textile business to a competitor for a fraction of its worth, citing urgent family matters that required immediate relocation. However, no forwarding address had been left, and attempts to contact the family had been unsuccessful. The article noted that neighbors were concerned because Eleanor Whitmore had been an active member of the community, involved in church activities and local charity work. My grandmother said that Mrs. Whitmore seemed frightened in the weeks before they disappeared. Mrs. Patterson continued. She stopped coming to church, stopped giving piano lessons. The children weren't seen playing outside anymore. This testimony added another layer of mystery to the already puzzling case of the Whitmore family photograph and their sudden vanishing. Researchers' next step was to identify the photography's studio where the Whitmore family portrait had been taken. The professional quality of the image, combined with the formal studio setup visible in the background, suggested it was the work of one of Boston's established photographers from that era. After hours of searching through historical business directories, she discovered that there were only 3 photography studios operating in the South End area during 1910. 2 of the studios had long since closed, but the third, Morrison & Sons Photography, had evolved into a modern portrait studio still operating in downtown Boston. The current owner, James Morrison III, was the great-grandson of the original founder. When the researcher visited Morrison & Sons Photography, she was amazed to find that the family had preserved an extensive archive of their business records, dating back to the studio's founding in 1885. James Morrison III, a man in his 60s with a passion for photographic history, was delighted to help with the investigation. We have appointment books, customer records, even some of the original glass plate negatives from that era, Morrison explained as he led her into the studio's basement archive. If the Whitmores had their photograph taken here, there should be some record of it. After an hour of searching through leather-bound appointment books, they found the entry, September 14th, 1910, Whitmore family portrait, paid in advance, special instructions noted. The special instructions notation was unusual, as most family portraits from that era followed standard procedures. Morrison located the corresponding customer file, which contained a handwritten note from his great-grandfather. Mrs. Whitmore insisted on multiple exposures, appeared extremely nervous throughout the session, requested that no copies be made for public display. Payment included extra fee for discretion. This discovery raised immediate questions. Why would Eleanor Whitmore be so nervous during a routine family portrait session? Why would she specifically request that no copies be made for public display? And most intriguingly, what was she looking at during the photograph that caused her eyes to focus beyond the camera lens? The answers to these questions would soon prove more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. While examining the Whitmore family photograph under different lighting conditions, the researcher noticed that the frame appeared to be original to the period. The ornate brass frame, typical of early 1900s photography, had developed a patina that suggested it had never been disturbed or reframed. This observation led to a careful inspection of the frame's construction. Using precision tools borrowed from a professional art restorer, she carefully separated the photograph from its backing. What she discovered between the photograph and the frame's backing board made her hands tremble. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, that had been hidden there for over a century. The letter, written in Eleanor Whitmore's careful script, was dated September 13th, 1910, just one day before the family portrait was taken at Morrison's studio. The contents of the letter would transform the entire investigation. My dearest sister Catherine, if you're reading this letter, then our worst fears have been realized. Robert has discovered the truth about Mr. Aldrich's business dealings, and we can no longer pretend that we are safe. The man who has been coming to our house, the one who calls himself a business associate, is not what he appears to be. Robert has found evidence that Mr. Aldrich has been using our textile business to smuggle something far more dangerous than imported fabrics. The letter continued. Yesterday evening, Robert showed me documents he had found hidden in Mr. Aldrich's shipments, papers that prove the man is connected to a network of criminals operating throughout New England. We have decided that we must leave Boston immediately, but we fear that Mr. Aldrich suspects Robert knows too much. Tomorrow we will have our family photograph taken, as it may be the last time we are all together. The final paragraph of the letter was the most chilling. I am writing this letter as insurance in case something happens to us. I will hide it behind our family photograph, where you might someday find it if you come looking for answers. During the photograph session, I will try to signal toward the location where Robert has hidden the evidence against Mr. Aldrich. Look for my eyes in the photograph, dear Catherine. They will tell you where to find the truth. This revelation suddenly made sense of Eleanor Whitmore's strange behavior during the photography session and explained why her eyes were focused beyond the camera lens. With Eleanor Whitmore's letter providing the crucial context, the researcher returned to the family photograph with new understanding. Eleanor's gaze, which had initially seemed random or distracted, was actually a deliberate signal intended for her sister Catherine. But where exactly was Eleanor looking, and what evidence had Robert Whitmore hidden there? Using digital enhancement software, the researcher was able to precisely calculate the angle and direction of Eleanor's gaze in the photograph. Based on the positioning of her eyes and the known layout of the Morrison photography studio from 1910, Eleanor appeared to be looking toward the studio's front window, specifically toward the building directly across the street. The researcher traveled back to the location of the original Morrison studio, which had been demolished in the 1960s to make way for modern development. However, the building that Eleanor had been staring at in the photograph was still standing. A 4-story brick building that had served as a boarding house in 1910 and was now converted into modern apartments. Working with the current building owner and reviewing historical property records, the researcher learned that Robert Whitmore had rented a small storage room on the 3rd floor of this building under an assumed name. The room, according to the 1910 records, had been paid for 6 months in advance, suggesting that Robert had planned their departure well before the family photograph was taken. The current tenant of what had been Robert's storage room, a graduate student named Peter Collins, was fascinated by the historical mystery and agreed to allow a search of the space. The room had been renovated several times over the decades, but its basic structure remained unchanged. Using Eleanor's photograph as a guide, the researcher was able to determine approximately where Eleanor's gaze would have intersected with the room across the street. Behind a section of exposed brick wall that had never been plastered over, Peter Collins discovered something remarkable: a small metal box that had been sealed into the masonry over a century earlier. Inside the box were the documents that Robert Whitmore had died to, protective evidence that would finally reveal the truth about the family's mysterious disappearance and the danger they had faced in their final days in Boston. The metal box that had been hidden in the brick wall for over 114 years contained a collection of documents that painted a disturbing picture of corruption and violence in early 20th century Boston. Robert Whitmore had carefully documented evidence of a criminal network that used legitimate businesses as fronts for illegal activities, ranging from smuggling to extortion. The most significant document was a detailed ledger in Robert's handwriting, showing how his textile importing business had been infiltrated by a man named Harrison Aldrich. According to Robert's notes, Aldrich had approached him in early 1910 with offers of lucrative contracts for importing fabrics from overseas. What Robert initially believed to be a legitimate business partnership gradually revealed itself to be something far more sinister. The ledger showed that Aldrich was using Robert's business to smuggle stolen goods and counterfeit documents throughout New England. Hidden within shipments of legitimate textiles were forged immigration papers, stolen jewelry, and evidence suggested weapons destined for criminal organizations in other cities. Robert had unknowingly become part of a network that extended from Boston to New York, Philadelphia, and beyond. Dr. Patricia Williams, a historian specializing in organized crime in early 20th century America, examined the documents and confirmed their significance. Well, what Robert Whitmore uncovered was evidence of one of the most sophisticated criminal networks operating in New England at that time, Dr. Williams explained. Harrison Aldrich was a known associate of several criminal organizations that controlled illegal activities along the East Coast. The documents also revealed the source of Eleanor Whitmore's fear. Robert had discovered that other business owners who had attempted to expose Aldrich's network had suffered mysterious accidents or had simply disappeared along with their families. A newspaper clipping in the box, dated August 1910, described the death of a Providence businessman who had been found drowned in Narragansett Bay just days after questioning Aldrich's business practices. The final document in the box was a note in Robert's handwriting, dated September 12, 1910. Aldrich suspects that I know too much. We must leave tomorrow. If something happens to us, this evidence must reach the authorities. This evidence finally explained why the Whitmore family had disappeared so suddenly, and why Eleanor had been so desperate to leave a coded message in their final family photograph. With Robert Whitmore's evidence in hand, the researcher began searching through historical records to determine what had actually happened to the family after they left Boston in September 1910. The investigation led to a discovery that was both heartbreaking and illuminating. In the archives of the Portland Press Herald, a Maine newspaper, she found a brief article dated September 20th, 1910. Family of 5 perishes in train accident near Augusta. The article described how a northbound passenger train had derailed due to suspected sabotage, killing all passengers in 2 specific cars. Among the victims listed were Robert Whitmore, his wife Eleanor, and their 3 children, traveling under the assumed name of Wilson. Further investigation revealed that this train accident was one of several suspicious incidents that occurred along the Boston to Montreal railway line during 1910. A report by railway investigators, preserved in the Maine State Archives, suggested that the derailment had been deliberately caused by loosened rails, but the case was never solved due to lack of evidence. Dr. Michael Torres, a transportation historian who had studied early 20th century railway crimes, confirmed the researchers' suspicions. There were several documented cases during this period where criminal organizations used railway sabotage to eliminate witnesses or rivals, Dr. Torres explained. The technology existed to cause derailments that would appear accidental, and investigations were often limited by the forensic capabilities of the time. Cross-referencing the passenger manifest with Robert Whitmore's hidden documents revealed the tragic truth. Harrison Aldrich had discovered the family's planned escape and had arranged for their elimination before they could reach safety. The Whitmore family's disappearance was not a voluntary relocation. It was murder disguised as an accident. The family photograph, taken just 6 days before their deaths, was Eleanor Whitmore's final attempt to ensure that the truth about Aldrich's criminal network would eventually be discovered. Her desperate gaze toward the hiding place of her husband's evidence was her last gift to future generations, a coded message that would take over a century to decipher. This revelation transformed the innocent-looking family portrait into something far more powerful, a testament to courage in the face of mortal danger, and a mother's determination to protect others, even when she could no longer protect her own children. The discovery of the Whitmore family's fate and Robert's evidence prompted the researcher to contact modern law enforcement, agencies and historical crime specialists. While the perpetrators of the 1910 crimes were long dead, the evidence provided crucial insights into early organized crime networks that had previously been poorly understood by historians. FBI historian Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, who specialized in historical criminal cases, examined Robert Whitmore's documents and confirmed their authenticity and significance. This evidence provides unprecedented insight into the operations of criminal networks in early 20th century New England, Agent Rodriguez explained. While we cannot prosecute crimes from 1910, this information helps us understand the evolution of organized crime in America. The documents reveal that Harrison Aldrich was part of a larger network known as the Atlantic Circle, which had operated criminal enterprises from Boston to Baltimore between 1905 and 1915. This organization had been suspected by law enforcement of the era, but had never been fully exposed. Due to their sophisticated use of legitimate businesses as fronts, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a genealogist specializing in victim advocacy, helped the researcher track down living descendants of the Whitmore family. Eleanor's sister Catherine, who had never learned what happened to her family, had passed away in 1965, but her descendants were still living in Massachusetts. Catherine's great-granddaughter, Susan Mitchell, was stunned to learn about her family's tragic history. "We always wondered why Great-Aunt Catherine kept that empty frame on her mantelpiece," Susan said. "She told us she was waiting for a photograph that never came. Now we understand that she was waiting for her sister's family to return." The researcher arranged for the original Whitmore family photograph to be returned to Susan Mitchell and her family, along with copies of all the evidence that had been discovered. For the first time in over a century, Eleanor Whitmore's message had reached its intended recipient, not her sister Catherine, but Catherine's descendants who could finally learn the truth about their family's fate. The reunion of the photograph with the Whitmore descendants provided emotional closure to a mystery that had remained unsolved for 114 years. Eleanor's eyes, which had seemed so haunting and desperate in the original image, could now be understood as the loving gaze of a mother, ensuring that her family's story would not be forgotten. The investigation that began with a simple estate sale discovery had uncovered far more than anyone anticipated. The Whitmore family photograph, initially purchased for $25 among other miscellaneous items, had revealed a story of courage, sacrifice, and determination that resonated across more than a century. Working with the Boston Historical Society, the researcher organized an exhibition titled Hidden Messages: How One Photograph revealed a century-old crime. The exhibition featured the original Whitmore family portrait, alongside the documents Robert had hidden and the evidence of the criminal network that had cost the family their lives. The exhibition drew thousands of visitors, many of whom were inspired by Eleanor Whitmore's ingenuity in leaving a coded message for future generations. Photography experts marveled at how Eleanor had managed to communicate crucial information through nothing more than the direction of her gaze, while historians praised Robert Whitmore's meticulous documentation of the criminal network he had discovered. Susan Mitchell and her family attended the exhibition's opening, finally able to honor their ancestors who had died protecting others from the criminal organization that threatened their community. Eleanor and Robert Whitmore were ordinary people who found themselves in an extraordinary situation, Susan said during her speech at the opening ceremony. And they chose to do what was right, even though they knew it would cost them everything. The case also inspired modern law enforcement agencies to examine other historical crimes with fresh perspectives. The techniques used to decode Eleanor's message, combining historical research, genealogical investigation, and modern technology, became a model for solving other cold cases from the early 20th century. Most importantly, the Whitmore family's story served as a reminder that even the most ordinary-looking photographs can contain extraordinary secrets. Eleanor Whitmore's eyes, which had seemed merely distracted in 1910, had actually been carrying a message across time, a testament to a mother's love and a family's courage that refused to be silenced by tragedy. The photograph now hangs in Susan Mitchell's home, no longer a mystery but a tribute to ancestors whose bravery helped expose a criminal network and whose story continues to inspire new generations. Eleanor Whitmore's eyes finally found their target, not just her sister Catherine, but all those who would learn from her family's sacrifice and remember that truth No matter how long buried, he eventually finds a way to emerge.